I'll pay you double if you owe anything, the manager sneered, his voice sharp like a knife cutting through the air. He leaned over the counter, lips curled into a mocking smile, eyes narrowed with contempt. His laughter filled the room, bouncing off the walls, pulling the attention of every customer in the store. The man he mocked stood calmly, wearing a simple dark hoodie and jeans, his face unreadable. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue back. He just watched, his silence stronger than any words. The manager's laughter grew louder, pulling a few chuckles from customers who didn't understand the cruelty behind it. To them, it was just a joke, maybe a manager messing with someone he thought was poor. But underneath that laughter was venom. There was hate, and the target of that hate had felt it 1,000 times before. The manager thought he had the upper hand. He thought he was mocking a man too broke, too powerless, too insignificant to fight back. But what he didn't know, what nobody in that store knew, was that the quiet man in front of him wasn't just a random customer. He was an undercover cop. And in that split second, as the manager's cruel words hung in the air, the room's energy shifted. The undercover officer's eyes locked on the manager's, his voice finally breaking the silence, calm but heavy with meaning. Are you sure you want to stand by those words? The laughter stopped. The store grew quiet. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. The manager blinked, his grin faltering, confusion flickering across his face. Before he could respond, the officer slowly reached into his pocket. The customers leaned in, breaths held, waiting to see what would happen. And then, he pulled out something that froze the entire room. A badge. The golden emblem caught the light, gleaming with power, authority, and truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The manager's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to swallow words that would no longer come. But it was too late. The undercover cop had heard everything, and he wasn't done. The story flashes back now to show how this moment came to be. The man's name was Marcus Lee, a decorated officer with over a decade of service, known for his bravery and his refusal to look away from injustice. But Marcus wasn't on duty that day. Not officially. He had walked into that store for something simple, groceries for his mother, who had been struggling with her health. Marcus never wanted attention. He hated the spotlight. To most people, he was just another black man in a hoodie, and he liked it that way. It let him see the world for what it really was. It let him watch how people treated him when they thought he had no power. And on this day, the store manager revealed himself without even knowing it. From the moment Marcus walked in, he noticed the stares. Not from everyone, but from the wrong ones. The kind that lingered too long. The kind that carried suspicion instead of kindness. He felt it near the fruit aisle when a security guard shadowed him. He felt it again when an older woman clutched her purse tighter as he passed. But Marcus, as always, kept his head down. It wasn't until he reached the counter that the real storm began. The manager, a man named Greg, stood tall behind the register. He wore his authority like armor, puffing his chest, speaking loudly so everyone could hear. He scanned Marcus's items without a smile, his eyes sharp, his mouth tight. Then, out of nowhere, the mockery began. You sure you can afford this? Times are hard, man. People like you usually run a tab. You owe money anywhere? I'll pay you double if you owe anything. The laughter that followed wasn't joy. It was humiliation dressed up as comedy. It was a weapon, and everyone in the store knew who it was aimed at. Marcus's stomach tightened, a familiar knot he'd felt too many times before. It wasn't just about him. It was about every moment he'd seen his father disrespected in front of neighbors, every time his younger brother was pulled over for driving while black, every story of families broken apart because of the poison of prejudice. He had promised himself long ago that when the moment came, he wouldn't stay silent. And here it was. The customers, sensing the tension, grew quiet. Some smirked, others looked away. But Marcus noticed a mother in the corner holding her son's hand tighter, whispering something he couldn't hear. That small detail hit him hard. What lesson would that child take away from this moment? That cruelty was allowed. That mockery was normal. Marcus couldn't let that happen. But instead of exploding with anger, something Greg expected, Marcus waited. He waited until the room was still, until all eyes were on him. Then he let the badge speak. and as the golden emblem glimmered in the light, Marcus's voice dropped lower, firm and steady. "You're going to regret saying that." The chapter ends with Greg's eyes widening, sweat beading at his temple. His laughter was gone now, replaced by fear. Customers whispered, pulling out their phones, recording what was about to happen. And before Greg could move, Marcus leaned closer and said the words that would change everything. "You're under investigation." The words hung in the air like thunder that refused to fade. "You're under investigation." The customers froze, their eyes wide, phones raised, recording every second. The store that had once hummed with small talk and grocery beeps was now dead silent. Greg, the manager, took a shaky step back. His smirk was gone, replaced by a nervous twitch in his jaw. He glanced at the badge again, his face paling with each second. His lips parted, fumbling for words. What? Investigation? For what? His voice cracked, no longer full of arrogance, but trembling like a cornered animal. Marcus didn't answer right away. He let the silence work against Greg. He'd learned long ago that silence could be louder than shouting. Customers leaned in, waiting, their curiosity sharper than knives. Greg's hands fidgeted, tugging at the bottom of his polo shirt. Sweat shined on his forehead. His eyes darted left and right, looking for support from his employees. But none came. The cashiers stayed still, their eyes lowered, unwilling to shield him. They had seen this side of him before. They had heard his cruel jokes. But today, someone finally stood against him. Marcus's gaze was calm but heavy, carrying the weight of every injustice he had witnessed in his life. "For your behavior," he said, his voice steady. "For your treatment of customers. For your profiling. For the way you think you can use power to humiliate instead of serve." Greg opened his mouth to protest, but his words stumbled. I was just joking. Just having fun. Everyone knows I don't mean it. Don't they?" His eyes darted toward the customers, begging for a nod, a smile, anything to back him up. But the crowd stayed quiet. Some crossed their arms. Others shook their heads. A few whispered, "Not funny anymore." The silence cut deeper than Marcus's words. Then suddenly Greg's mask cracked. The fear that had been building in his chest boiled over into anger. His face flushed red, and his fists clenched. "You can't come in here and accuse me like that," he shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. The sound echoed through the store. "You're not in uniform. You're not even on duty. You think a badge gives you the right to embarrass me in my own store." The air thickened with tension. A baby cried in the distance. A man near the frozen section whispered, "This is about to get ugly." Marcus didn't flinch. He had faced worse: armed dealers, violent criminals, life-and-death chases. Greg's rage was nothing compared to those battles. Still, Marcus knew one thing. Rage like Greg's was dangerous, not because it was powerful, but because it was desperate. Greg leaned closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You think you're better than me? You think flashing that badge means you can walk in here and ruin me? I run this place. These people work for me, not for you." His words dripped with venom, and in that moment, Marcus saw it clearly. The mask was gone. Greg wasn't just a man who made a cruel joke. He was a man who thrived on power, who believed humiliation kept him in control. And now, with his control slipping, he was lashing out like a cornered predator. But Marcus also knew something Greg didn't. He wasn't alone, because at that exact moment, the sound of heavy footsteps filled the store. 2 officers entered, their uniforms crisp, their presence commanding. The customers gasped, parting like water around a rock. Blue and red lights flickered faintly from outside, their reflections spilling across the glass doors. Greg's face drained of all color. "Oh no," he whispered. One of the officers spoke, his tone sharp and professional. "Gregory Mason?" Greg stammered. "Why, yeah, that's me." "You need to come with us. Now." The entire store held its breath. Greg stumbled backward, his chest rising and falling quickly. Wait, what is this? What's happening? I didn't do anything wrong." His eyes darted toward Marcus, burning with betrayal. "You did this. You set me up." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Greg's. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of truth. No, Greg, you did this to yourself. The officers closed in, one reaching for handcuffs. Customers pulled out their phones again, capturing every second. Some looked relieved, others shocked, but all of them knew they were witnessing justice unfold in real time. Greg's shouts grew louder. This is a mistake. You can't arrest me. I didn't. But before he could finish, his arms were yanked behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the store like a final verdict. And that's when something unexpected happened. As the officers began leading Greg away, a voice rose from the crowd. It was shaky but filled with courage. A young cashier, no more than 19, stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. I have something to say, she declared, her voice breaking through the silence. Everyone turned to her. The officers paused. Even Greg stopped struggling, his eyes narrowing. The cashier's next words would shatter everything. The store was so silent, you could hear the hum of the refrigerators in the back. All eyes turned to the young cashier. She looked small standing there in her apron, her dark curls falling into her face, but her voice carried a strength that nobody expected. I have something to say. Greg froze, the officers holding him steady by his arms. His eyes narrowed, lips curling into a sneer. Don't you dare, Amy, he spat. His voice was low, warning, but the whole store heard it. Amy flinched, but she didn't back down. Her hands trembled, but her chest rose and fell with determination. She looked at Marcus, then at the officers. I can't stay quiet anymore. People need to know what really happens here. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones tilted, zooming in closer. The air was electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. The officers gave her a small nod, encouraging her to continue. Marcus's eyes softened, silently urging her on. Amy swallowed hard. Greg does this all the time. He treats customers differently because of how they look. He makes jokes, mean ones. But it's not just jokes. She shook her head, her voice cracking. He follows people around the store. He tells us to keep an eye on certain shoppers just because of their skin color. And if anyone speaks up, her voice dropped, barely above a whisper. He threatens to fire us. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some nodded in agreement, others looked outraged. A man near the entrance raised his hand. She's right. He accused me of trying to steal milk last week. Milk? I've shopped here for years. Another customer spoke up. Same thing happened to my son. He was embarrassed right here at the checkout because Greg said his card was probably stolen. Voices piled on, one after another, building into a wave of truth. Each story layered onto the last, painting a picture of a man who had hidden behind his title for too long. Greg's face turned red, his chest heaving with anger. They're lying. All of them. He tried to yank his arms free, but the officers held him tighter. His voice rose into a desperate shout. You can't believe this. They're just trying to ruin me. Amy's eyes filled with tears, but her voice grew stronger. No, Greg. You ruined yourself. We've been scared to speak, but not anymore. The crowd clapped, the sound rising like thunder in the small store. Some customers even chanted softly. Justice! 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 Marcus watched, a knot forming in his chest. He hadn't expected this, a whole community finding its voice in one moment. He saw the fear in Amy's trembling hands, the relief in the customers' faces, the courage sparking in people who had been silent too long. This wasn't just about Greg anymore. It was about something bigger. The officers exchanged glances. One pulled out a small notepad. We'll need statements from everyone willing to come forward, he said. Every single one of you. Greg thrashed, spitting words like poison. This is a setup. You're all against me. I'll sue every one of you. His voice cracked, no longer filled with control, but panic. He looked around desperately for anyone, to take his side. But no one did. Then, just as the officers began to guide him toward the exit, Greg did something no one expected. With a sudden burst of rage, he lunged forward, nearly pulling free from their grip. His eyes locked on Marcus, filled with hatred. You, he bellowed. This is your fault. You'll regret this. The officer shoved him back, wrestling to restrain him, but in the chaos his foot caught the side of a display stand. A tower of canned goods toppled, crashing loudly across the floor. Customers screamed, some ducking, others stumbling backward. Phones wobbled as people tried to keep recording. The store was thrown into complete chaos, and as the officers pinned Greg hard against the counter, one of the cans rolled to Marcus's feet, spinning until it stopped. Marcus bent down, his badge catching the store lights as he straightened again. The sight of it, the badge gleaming in the middle of the mess, was the final image burned into everyone's minds. But Greg wasn't done. Through gritted teeth, his face pressed against the counter, he spat out a final chilling threat. "This isn't over." The words silenced the crowd instantly. Fear rippled through the store. If it wasn't over, then what was coming next? "This isn't over." The words hung heavy in the air, louder than the crash of the cans, louder than the shouts from customers still recording, louder even than the officers' commands. Everyone froze. Mothers clutched their children's hands tighter. Men shifted uneasily, their eyes darting from Greg's twisted face to Marcus's steady one. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He had heard those words before, in dark alleys, during dangerous operations, whispered from men who thought fear was power. But hearing it here, in a neighborhood grocery store, was different. It was raw, ugly, and personal. The officers shoved Greg harder against the counter, cuffing his wrists tighter until the metal clicked loud enough for the crowd to hear. One officer leaned close to his ear and growled, "It's over for you. Don't make it worse." But Greg only laughed. A broken, bitter sound. "You don't know who I know. You don't know what I can do." His eyes flicked to Marcus, venom burning in them. "Especially you." Marcus didn't flinch. He stood tall, letting the silence answer for him. His badge at his side caught the light again, reminding everyone in the store exactly who Greg had mocked, exactly who Greg had underestimated. Amy stepped closer, her voice shaky but firm. "You've bullied people here for too long, Greg. Nobody's afraid of you anymore." For the first time, Greg's smile faltered. The crowd's murmurs swelled louder, stronger, voices rising together in agreement. Customers who once avoided eye contact with him now spoke freely, their fear turning into fuel. "He accused my son of stealing. He told me not to come back because I asked for a refund. He followed me every time I shopped here." The stories poured out like water breaking through a dam. The truth was unstoppable now. Greg's eyes darted wildly, searching for a lifeline that didn't exist. The smug manager who once stood so tall now looked small, cornered, trapped not just by the cuffs on his wrists, but by the truth itself. The officers finally hauled him up, dragging him toward the door. His feet stumbled against the broken cans on the floor. The crowd parted, but no one moved quietly. Every step he took toward the exit was marked with whispers, glares, and the ever-present glow of cell phone cameras, capturing his downfall. Just as they reached the door, Greg twisted his neck and shouted one last time, "This whole place will regret this. You'll regret it." But the officer opened the door, shoving him into the daylight, where the squad car waited, lights flashing. The sound of the door slamming shut behind them felt like the closing of a chapter long overdue. Inside the store, silence lingered for a moment. Then, slowly, people began to clap. Not loud, not chaotic, just a steady, growing rhythm that filled the air with hope. Amy covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. Marcus walked over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You were brave," he said softly. "Your voice mattered." Her shoulders shook as she cried, but she smiled through the tears. "I was so scared, but I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Not after what he did to you." Marcus nodded. "Fear only wins when good people stay silent. Today, you didn't." The crowd began to disperse, but something lingered in the air, something stronger than fear. It was unity. People spoke to one another, strangers offering comfort, neighbors sharing looks that said, "We'll stand together now." As Marcus stepped outside, he saw Greg sitting in the back of the squad car, his face twisted in rage. But this time, Marcus didn't feel anger or fear. He felt resolve. Because Greg was wrong. It was over. Not just for him, but for every quiet injustice he thought he could get away with. The door of the squad car slammed, muffling Greg's voice once and for all. The flashing lights carried him away, his threats fading into nothing more than echoes. Marcus took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs. For the first time that day, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Justice had spoken, not through a badge alone, but through the courage of voices that refused to be silenced. And as he turned back toward the store, seeing Amy comforted by the very community she once feared losing, Marcus knew this wasn't just about a cruel manager and his twisted games. It was about something far greater: the strength to stand up, the power of truth, the hope that no matter how dark the world could seem, light would always break through. And in that moment, on an ordinary street in an ordinary town, a battle had been won.